One of the biggest enigmas in the Chaplin canon is a film called The Professor. It was first discovered in Chaplin's Swiss vaults a few years after his death by film historians Kevin Brownlow and David Gill as they were preparing their documentary series, Unknown Chaplin. Shot in 1919, this segment introduces us to Professor Bosco, a down-on-his-luck flea circus impresario who spends an evening in a men's shelter. Professor Bosco manages a troupe of invisible fleas in a routine that probably traces its roots to Chaplin's years in British music hall. He briefly employed the same routine for a bit in his short film, By the Sea, which had been filmed a few years earlier for SNA in 1915. The Professor was made during a year of personal and professional turmoil for Chaplin. After launching his studio and production company to great acclaim in 1918 with two big hits, 1919 proved to be more difficult as a troubled marriage sapped his creative juices. His first film released that year, Sunnyside, was an artistic failure, and he compared its production to having his teeth pulled. But he soon found inspiration for a new film in a young actor named Jackie Coogan and began to tailor a feature film for him. The Kid would consume him for the rest of 1919 and 1920, and eventually be released in 1921. The Professor Bosco sequence, like Chaplin's subsequent short, 1919's A Day's Pleasure, was filmed in the middle of a long production of The Kid. We don't know whether the Bosco scene was intended to be a separate short film release, like A Day's Pleasure, or part of the larger narrative in The Kid, in which he would play a second role in the same film, as, by the way, he did a few times in his career. As it turned out, the Bosco scene was never released in any form. A few years later, in 1922, Chaplin was looking to end his difficult relationship with his releasing company, First National, with the completion of a featurette called The Pilgrim. But he was unhappy with the terms First National was providing him for this for-real film, and threatened to substitute The Pilgrim with a more standard two-reeler. The only problem is he did not have a shorter film ready to substitute. That's when he took a chapter out of the book of one of his greatest legal foes, George K. Spoor, the head of the SNA Film Manufacturing Company. Chaplin had worked for SNA a couple of years earlier, and after he left, Spoor created an allegedly new Chaplin film called Triple Trouble by cobbling together the outtakes that Chaplin had left behind. Chaplin remembered the unused Professor Bosco sequences, but realizing they would hardly fill out a reel, much less the two that he needed to satisfy First National, merged it with outtakes previously shot here for Sunnyside and for Shoulder Arms. The proposed cutting continuity and Chaplin's inner titles were discovered in 2014 by editor Paul Duncan when he was putting together his Chaplin Archives book for Taschen. Then, in 2018, the Chaplin office in Paris edited the film and inserted Chaplin's original inner titles. The sequences are tied together by only the loosest of threads and would have been seen by 1922 audiences as just as much of a patchwork as Triple Trouble. Ultimately, Chaplin and First National were able to come to terms on The Pilgrim, eliminating the need for this potpourri of a two-reeler. Chaplin never returned to the unused sequences again, although elements of the Sunnyside shaving scene found their way into The Great Dictator, and Professor Bosco's flea circus was later adapted for Limelight. Please now enjoy The Professor, reconstructed as Chaplin would have released it in 1922.